Mad Max Fury Road was released in 2015 and took everybody by storm. Despite it being a rated R action movie, a genre that usually fails financially and critically, Warner Brothers gave George Miller $150 million and allowed him almost total control of his project. The movie was a total success in almost all terms of the word. The critics loved it and rated it the 15th highest movie of the year. It soared at the box office, making over 2.5 times its budget, but above all else, it was loved by audience members. Fans of the original view it as not only an acceptable sequel, but maybe even the best in the entire franchise. It's one of my favorite movies that came out last year, and a lot of that has to do with it being more than just a typical action movie. It has heart, it has emotion, and above all else, makes some pretty great points about society. However, when you evaluate it solely as an action movie, it ends up being superior to almost every other action movie released in the past decade. First, we're going to evaluate this movie based on only what is seen on screen, and look at why this is such a great action movie, before peeling it back a layer, and looking at what this movie has to offer, and what it's really saying about society. This should go without saying, but I will be discussing spoilers, so if you have not seen Mad Max Fury Road, make sure you check out the movie before finishing this review and analysis. In terms of visuals, what this movie does best is its framing. Everything that you need to see is perfectly framed in the center of the screen. Sure, there's a whole lot going on the outside, however, only the important stuff is framed in the very middle. Everything that you need to see is perfectly framed in the center of the screen. George Miller essentially draws your attention to the middle of the screen, and everything he wants to show you, he puts emphasis there. Take this sequence for example. Max picks up a warboy and throws him, but instead of staying on Max, the camera focuses on the warboy. That way when you see the others coming out of the water, you have your attention already focused on them. This center framing can also be seen through this scene. It cuts back and forth between 10 different angles in just 20 seconds, but because everything is framed in the middle, our attention is right where it should be, focusing on the different characters. Another great technique that Miller used throughout this entire movie was the use of long and deliberate shots. It's hard to find any shot in this movie shorter than 2 seconds, some of the lengthier ones can be up to a minute. Obviously these aren't breaking any records. With that in mind, the shots are long enough and steady enough where the audience knows exactly what is going on. Take, for example, this clip from the Bourne Ultimatum. In just 6 seconds, there are 11 different cuts and angles. Essentially what this does is disorientate the audience. Instead of seeing Bourne jump through the window, you see him enter another room via the window. It's kind of hard to break down exactly what it does, but you're confused as to what you're seeing until you see it actually happen. However, in Mad Max Fury Road, you know exactly what is happening. Fury Road just shows characters doing what they're doing, whether that be running, jumping, or anything else. They only need to show it in 2 or 3 different angles, not a dozen. However, there is a big step up in terms of how many cuts there are in Mad Max Fury Road as opposed to the earlier Mad Max titles. In 1981's Road Warrior, there are a little over 1,400 different cuts within a 90-minute runtime. However, Fury Road has over 2,700 cuts with a 120-minute runtime. There were a lot more cuts per minute in Fury Road, and when George Miller was asked about this, he said it had to do with the pace that people are watching movies. The term he used was speed reading movies. Essentially, this means that people want more and more action, and let's be honest, George Miller delivered. There is barely a single scene that's a down moment, however, it all flows together very well. Miller isn't a director stuck in the 70s and 80s, but instead is someone who wants to be able to adapt to the times and make a movie that he wanted to make. It's the same movie he wanted at core, however he changed the structure of it around to make it appeal to more general audiences today. The other part of how great the visuals are in this movie is how steady Miller always keeps the camera. For this, I definitely should be giving credit where credit is due to the film's director of photography, John Seale. In 1975, when Garrett Brown invented the Steadicam, it ushered in a whole new filming style. Cameras could be just as versatile as the people that they are filming. This had already been used by countless directors up to this point, and has made some pretty great shots. from iconic ones used by directors Stanley Kubrick and Martin Scorsese, or more recent ones by cinematographer Emmanuel Luzbecki in titles like Children of Men, Gravity, Birdman, and most recently, The Revenant. However, where there is Steadicam, some directors prefer shaky cam. Depending on who you ask, shaky cam is either the worst thing in the world and ruining movies today, or a rather helpful filming technique that is used to create chaos. However, there is definitely no lack of chaos in Fury Road, but instead of trying to artificially achieve it, this movie shows it as explicitly and as clearly as possible. If the camera is moving at all, it's moving with something like a car or a person. That way the viewers can continue to look at the moving object. There is a natural and consistent pace to the camera movements, and everything stays in frame perfectly. Finally, let's discuss the element of CGI in this movie. A lot of people are giving this movie praise for only using practical effects and being a milestone for practical effects, when in all reality this could not be any further from the truth. This is one of the most CGI-heavy movies of the year. Certainly the movie used some practical effects, and a lot of them. A lot of the stunts you saw were real, but people have this idea in their head that CGI is bad and is used in bad movies. But a more correct saying would be CGI is a tool, just like anything else, and is used in every movie. If you've seen a movie released in the past year, I can almost guarantee that it has at least some CGI in it. Whether that be something small like removing an electrical wire from the background, or something massive like creating a world and all the characters in it. CGI is something found in almost every modern movie, and it's usually for the better. It allows the directors to get better lighting sometimes, or just be able to experiment around a little bit more. What Mad Max Fury Road did so well in terms of CG was use a healthy combination of computer generation and practical effects. Most nearly everything that you saw in Fury Road happened to a degree, but it certainly didn't look the way you saw it. Instead, they would shoot something, then go back, remove the cast, remove the crew, use color correction to change the environment, add different layers, add cars, add explosions, add canyons, add almost anything. Without a doubt, there's a lot of practical effects, but there are just as many computer-generated ones. Remember, this scene, well, it was almost all CGI. I agree with almost everything people have to say about this movie in terms of CGI. This is going to be the way that films are shot in the future. However, where I disagree is when people think that CGI is just going to disappear in the future. CGI is a huge milestone for filmmaking, and we're not going to see it disappear for a very long time. In the next decade, prepare to see even more actors in movies where actors are doing stunts, but then supplementing them with computer effects. It's definitely a talent, and Fury Road did this almost perfectly. But now let's move on and discuss the second layer of this movie, what this movie is actually saying about culture in different societies. Immortan Joe creates a citadel in which he is in charge, and everyone looks up to him and respects him. By all traditional views, Immortan Joe should be somewhere towards the bottom. He is old, he needs a respirator to breathe, but the movie doesn't tell you everything you need to know about him, and instead, it's much more subtle about his mythology. There's no 20 minutes of exposition explaining exactly how the world got the way it is. We are just thrust into the world and then thrust into action. However, he is not alone at the top of the food chain. In addition to what some might call some sort of a royal family, the people who are at the top are those with a talent. For example, Furiosa is respected because of her ability to drive well, stay focused, and do what she must do to survive. The movie embodies the idea of people having value based upon their unique abilities. According to Joe, Furiosa is the only woman in the Citadel who has any talent with the exception of producing milk and making children. There are plenty of other women in the Citadel, however, they are just one of the masses, a faceless and meaningless character in the masses of other faceless and meaningless characters. Joe keeps the people who he thinks are useful and carefully hand selects people who can give him the most. This is a world where your worth is determined by what you can give. After Max is captured, he offers two commodities, the first being his car. After he is captured and tries to escape, he is seen running and slides on his car, after it's being destroyed. Later in one of the chases, he spots one of the war boys driving his car, so when he was captured that was a major victory because they got his car. He is also useful to them when he can be used for his blood. After he's being captured, you can see his blood type being tattooed on his back. He isn't useful as a person per se, but he is useful as a blood donor. Proving your worth in the wasteland is another huge feat. To Immortan Joe, all the war boys are the same, and rightfully so. There are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of them, and proving that you are special is a driving force for all the war boys. Nux does everything he can to prove that he has some value to Immortan Joe, so he isn't just one of the masses. He is something special. However, something special isn't always the best thing in the wasteland. Joe trusts Nux enough to let him go and try and infiltrate the tanker and save his wives. However, Nux is overpowered and ultimately fails himself. Because of this, he realizes that he is just one of the masses, and this causes him to change as a person. He meets people who begin to care for him and advances as a person and as a character. In the Wasteland, a huge sense of worth is built upon your ability to drive, and how well you can do it. I already touched upon this when discussing Furiosa, but let's not forget the argument Nux had with another warboy over who could drive his car. Immortan Joe's Colt's symbol is a steering wheel. Everyone carries around their steering wheels, and just like it is today, a car is a symbol of wealth, and those with cars and those who can drive well are at the top. The movie also touches upon the government spending and how Immortan Joe is able to enslave tens of thousands, again, if not more, people and warboys. First, he has something that everyone wants: water. In a world without water, water is the biggest resource that everyone needs. It's estimated that you can only last 3 days without it, so obviously it's a very precious commodity. However, the way that Joe uses the water, he treats it like people do today. Miller might have been talking about the way our country and world waste water today, but regardless, Joe has no problem with wasting resources. Because water is one thing that everyone wants and everyone needs, when they see someone who has the ability to waste it, they see him in a higher position. Joe has no shortage of resources, from water, milk, to luscious green plants. The people in power always have it the best. Joe also promises the warboy that if they sacrifice themselves or die in battle, they will go to Valhalla.
I am awaited! I am awaited in Valhalla!
If you're not familiar with your Norse mythology, Valhalla, which means Hall of the Slain, is a majestic, enormous hall located in Asgard, ruled over by the god Odin. Essentially, if you give yourself up for Joe, he promises you a majestic afterlife. It's also a term that is sometimes used in the United States Marine Corps, where it is achieved after finding out what a true warrior is. However, the biggest statement that this movie makes is literally laid out for you. Our babies will not be warlords, who killed the world, and we are not things. These are painted on the wall and the ceiling after Joe realizes that his wives have been taken, and are a message to both Joe and the audience. Now, in my opinion, these are revealed to the audience in order of importance, so let's discuss them in that order. They are very simple and all can be interpreted literally. The first is, our babies will not be warlords. It's a statement about how people are valued. If someone is purebred, they will be perfect to be a warlord. Look at Immortan Joe's son, Rictus Erectus. The woman who Joe has enslaved wants something for themselves and for their children, are willing to risk their lives for it. The next one, Who Killed the World, is a little bit harder to understand, especially seeing as from this movie alone we have little to no backstory to the world, and even less on who Joe is, and who he was. However, the idea of who killed the world is one that has been in the series since the very beginning. In the original Mad Max, it is explained that a war over the limited resources that still exist caused the world to fall into chaos. So when the woman asks that question, it implies that they think it was Immortan Joe. They're using him as a figurehead for all things evil, because he is an evil person. He represents all things bad, and that is how the women see him and treat him. At one point, the movie question is asked again, in which the woman asks Nux,
We're not to blame!
Then who killed the world?
He doesn't know, and yet they blame him because he represents Joe, who represents all evil. Finally, We Are Not Things should speak for itself. Joe uses people as things, whether that be women for breeding and milk, Max for blood, cog fodder for machinery, anything. The point being, people are used as things. This rides off the idea brought earlier when discussing people's worth in the wasteland. The wives' teacher, Miss Giddy, says,
You cannot own a human being. Sooner or later, someone pushes back.
Despite Joe trying to turn people into things, free will is going to take over an enslavement. People are willing to fight for what they believe in, and are willing to do things out of their comfort zone for the prevalence of our society. My least favorite aspect of Mad Max Fury Road was that of the ghosts and Max haunting from the past. I have no problem with our protagonist having a troubled past. I think it adds a lot of depth to the character and makes us care for him even more. However, I hate the way it's presented to us. If he had just had the line,
I am the one who runs from both the living and the dead,
I would have loved it. For a lot of people, it was just a throwaway line, but when you really break it down and think about it and compare it to the rest of the series, it begins to make sense. Most of this movie does a phenomenal job at telling you the bare minimum and letting you ultimately figure out everything else. In our world, you don't question why mailmen wear uniforms because mailmen wear uniforms, in the same way that you wouldn't question why the war boys are all painted white in this movie. It's the way the movie portrays itself, and it doesn't tell you why Max doesn't ask why people are painted white, because that is the world that he lives in. So I never understood why they literally shoved Max's history in our face. However, one thing that I really loved about this was how Max caused the death of the splendid Eranghad, Joe's pregnant wife. He shoots her, obviously on accident, but later, when she puts herself out on the war rig to stop Joe from shooting at it, she eventually dies. There is certainly some religious symbolism here. She sacrificed herself so the others can get away, but let's look closely at her death. She slips on the blood from her cut-up leg. It was Max's fault that she died. So she is essentially someone else, someone who is innocent, someone who died trying to save him, someone who represents life, who Max is responsible for her death. So that's my interpretation of some of the elements of Mad Max Fury Road. On a technical level, the film is phenomenal, far and away one of the best, if not the best, of the past few years. It's a movie that touches upon a lot of different real issues, and for that reason, it shines much brighter than your typical summer blockbuster. Make sure you drop a comment and tell me what you thought about the movie and what you think about the statements made in this movie. Leave a like if you enjoyed and subscribe so you can join me next time. If you're interested in seeing one of my previous analysis videos, on the left is going to take you to my breakdown of the film Goodfellas. On the right is going to be my original review of Mad Max Fury Road when it came out in theaters earlier this year. Check out one of those if you want to, or if not, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.